Sadnam. We are Jen and Ramtin from Heart Center Revolution.
Our intention with this podcast is to share the best of Kundalini Yoga and conscious living with you so you can live a more heart-centered life. Satnam, and welcome to episode 33 of the Heart Centered Revolution podcast. This episode is all about the use of spiritual names in Kundalini Yoga. They sound a bit strange and are part of, I think, the mystique that Kundalini Yoga has that makes it seem strange to newcomers. But once you learn more about it, you'll see it's not that scary. And in fact, it's a totally optional part of a Kundalini Yoga practice or even teaching Kundalini Yoga. This topic was inspired by an email we got from one of our amazing listeners in Wales called Wayne. So he was asking about kind of the thinking behind spiritual names in Kundalini Yoga, like how they're used in people's practice. He asked whether Ramtin and I use them and kind of how you know it's time to get one and how you go about doing that. So we will answer all of those questions in this episode. And then after the discussion of spiritual names, I'm going to guide you through a short breathing practice, the breath of fire practice. Breath of fire is always good to practice step by step, kind of on its own, to make sure you're doing the technique correctly. And then it's just got plenty of benefits, as I'm sure you know. So we'll go through a little breath of fire. And then at the end, I'll just remind you about the retreat we have coming up. So your spiritual name, or a spiritual name, is thought of as like your spiritual identity or your soul identity. And so it's this idea that as a human being, you have an earthly name that was given to you by your parents or whoever cared for you when you were an infant. And that kind of reflects your earthly status. And then the spiritual name is a reflection of your soul and of your spirit. And it does this through the literal sound vibrations, but then also the meanings of the words. As far as I could tell in my research, Yogi Bhajan started this practice. I'm not sure if it kind of predates him in the yogic teachings, but I know that when he was here and teaching in the US, he would give a spiritual name to anyone who requested one. So I found two good quotes from him about them. And so he says that your spiritual name is your designated destiny, your heavenly identity. That's all it is. You may or may not live up to it, but it is your guiding force. And it's a prayer. When somebody calls me Yogi Ji, it means one who is united with the greater soul. When someone calls me Bhajan, it means a divine song. And if somebody calls me Har Bhajan Singh, it means the lion who sings the divine song. It's a prayer in the other man's word. What is a prayer? It's a calling. And you answer the calling. You get uplifted. It's a plus. It's a way of receiving people's blessings. So in that quote, he's talking a little bit about the meaning or importance of the words in the spiritual name, but also the effect of if you have other people call you that name, it's almost like every time they say your spiritual name, they're making a prayer to you, but they're also calling you to live up to your spiritual purpose or your divine intention in this lifetime. The other relevant quote I found from him is, he said, "We will ask you to understand your spiritual incarnation and your spiritual name and try to find the strength to live it." So again, it's this idea that the spiritual name is like a reflection of your divine self. It's a reflection of your spiritual capacity in this lifetime. And then whether you live up to that and recognize that part of yourself is kind of up to you and has to do with your karma and what actions you choose to take in this lifetime. So men and women's names each end with a different suffix, I guess. I don't know if those terms apply to spiritual names. But anyways, so women, the last part of their name is Kaur, Kaur. And that means princess or lioness of God. And so it's this idea, princess, I think that people don't like the term princess because it has the like Disney princess kind of vibe to it. But the way I think of princess is kind of like you are in the divine lineage of God. That's technically what princess means, is that you're the daughter of royalty. And so that's kind of how I think of the princess translation. And then, or Kaur, Kaur, can be translated as lioness. And then men's names end with Singh, Singh, and Singh translates to the Lion of God. And so, as often happens with these translations, it's like the direct translations of the word doesn't capture the true meaning of what it's trying to convey. And so the real meaning, the real gravitas behind Kaur, Kaur, and Singh, Singh, are that they convey nobility, grace, power, and the courage to live consciously. Now, interestingly, oftentimes a couple, so a married couple, will receive the same spiritual name. So both partners will get the same name. And this kind of goes with the idea that when you're married, you kind of become one soul in two bodies. And I've shared before on the podcast that particular conceptualization doesn't really resonate with me personally. But then I realized today I've only been married for 3 years. So maybe after 20 years, I will resonate with that more. But that's kind of the idea, is that when you're married, you kind of complement each other, and you kind of you complement one another, strengthen one another, and kind of have the same entity with the same name. So sometimes that can happen. And sometimes names that are typically one gender will be given to another gender. And then sometimes, like, the traditional translation of the words in a spiritual name will not match like Yogi Bhajan's translations. So when you get your name, it comes with like the intended meaning for this context, right? For the context of receiving a spiritual name, while the actual words might have other interpretations. So the decision to receive a spiritual name or to get one is totally up to you. So you get to decide on at which point on your path you are ready to call in a spiritual name. And Yogi Bhajan said that when someone asks for a spiritual name, then they're ready for it. It kind of ties in with this whole concept within Kundalini Yoga that I love of self-initiation. So many other yogic practices, and even like over the past thousands of years, you were initiated by a teacher. And so kind of your teacher decided when you were ready for certain things. But that's not how Kundalini Yoga, as taught by Yogi Bhajan, works. This is all about self-initiation. So you decide how much, how often, which practices you're going to do, whether or not you're going to get a spiritual name. Once you get it, whether or not you're going to use it publicly. Like, it's the whole philosophy behind these teachings is here are the teachings. We really recommend that you maintain these things and experiment with like how it feels to you, but ultimately you self-initiate what parts of the practice you want to do. And that includes whether or not you receive a spiritual name. However, I would encourage you to put some thought into it, and don't just listen to this podcast and go out and get one because other people have one or for a spiritual ego thing. Really check in with yourself and see if you are ready to meet the reflection of your divine self. Because it's a pretty powerful experience. And if you're not ready to receive it, then you'll likely be disappointed or out of resonance with the name. And so I would really encourage you to sit with this idea for a while, unless it's a clear yes. Like if you're a clear yes, you know your intuition, of course, get it or request one. But if you're not sure, if this is the first time you're hearing of spiritual names, like I would really recommend that you sit with the idea. And as you meditate and as you kind of go throughout your day, like ask yourself and ask your guides if you're ready for this name, because it does call on you to elevate yourself. And if you're already focusing on elevating yourself in other ways, or if you're in a place where you're not ready for that, then I would recommend just waiting. It'll be there for you when you're ready. So when Yogi Bhajan was alive, he would give people their spiritual name. So they would have to request it. And then based on your birth date, so there's like a numerology thing that goes into it. And then if he knew you personally, he would consider that, from my understanding. And then he would somehow use the Sikh text to determine the name that reflects that person's kind of spiritual identity. And then during the last 30 years of his life, he was training Niranjan Kaur, who was his chief of staff, on this process of how to do it. And so now that he has passed, this responsibility has passed on to Niranjan Kaur. So if or when you feel ready to get your spiritual name, you request it on a website. And so you go to 3ho.org. So in case you're unfamiliar, 3HO is an organization that was created by Yogi Bhajan to help support and spread the teachings of Kundalini Yoga. And 3HO is a reference to what Yogi Bhajan stated he was teaching, or what you get from practicing Kundalini Yoga, or kind of the purpose is to be healthy, happy, and holy. And so 3HO is, the 3H is healthy, happy, and holy. Anyhow, so to get your spiritual name, you go to 3ho.org. And right now, as I'm looking at the main page, it is, on the left-hand side, there's a big box that says request a spiritual name. And so when you go there, you enter your birth given name or your earthly name, your birth date, you answer a couple questions, and then it'll ask you to donate. I think it's like $30. But you don't have to donate in order to get the name. They just request that you do to help support kind of the ongoing tradition of doing it this way. And I know in the spiritual and yoga communities, there's a lot of resistance to providing financial exchange for spiritual teachings. But within the Kundalini Yoga teachings, and also as a therapist, they've done a lot of research around things that you've paid for, or at least offered an energetic exchange for. You get more value out of it. And so if you want to get more out of your spiritual name, and if you want to value your spiritual name, I really recommend that you donate something. And if you don't have financial means, like if you don't have an extra $5 or $10, because you can donate any amount. Like I said, they request 30 or 40, I think, but you can donate any amount. But if you don't have extra financial resources to exchange for these spiritual teachings or the spiritual calling, I highly recommend that you choose an act of service. You probably can't give it to 3HO as an online thing, but you choose an act of service in your daily life to do kind of karmically in exchange for the spiritual name. Because if you do so, you will get much more out of the name. It's kind of just how our minds work and how the universe works. All right, so once you request the name, you get an email with your name, a guide on how to pronounce it, and then the translation. There's kind of like a direct translation of what the words mean, and then the meaning translation of like what the intended meaning is. And then once you get it, it's recommended that you kind of meditate on it, you write it out, you chant it to yourself, you kind of really sit with it for about 40 days and kind of let your identity like integrate this new reflection of itself. It is recommended that you ask people to call you by your spiritual name. It's a way of reinforcing the meaning. Like I shared in that earlier quote of Yogi Bhajan's, it's kind of a way of using other people to help you elevate yourself. Because every time they call you by your spiritual name, it's a calling or a prayer for you to be in resonance with the vibration of that name. However, for a lot of reasons, a lot of people choose not to use their spiritual name publicly. And I think a lot of time this choice is really a combination of like personal preference, but also your local Kundalini Yoga community. So for example, here in Huntington Beach, the Kundalini Yoga studio where Ramtin and I did our teacher training, the woman who owns the studio does not use the spiritual name. She, I believe, didn't even receive one. She actually feels great resonance with her given name, and she feels like her given name has a spiritual calling for her. So she never felt the desire or need to get a spiritual name. So that's kind of, she's the studio owner, and then there are lead trainers who lead the teacher training, and they all have used spiritual names, but they all also practice directly with Yogi Bhajan. And so I kind of wonder if as the generations go on, if the use of spiritual names will decrease or not. It's just an observation, but I'm kind of curious to see what happens with that. So anyway, in this local studio, since she doesn't use one, there isn't a culture really that puts pressure on the students to get one. And I should go on a caveat here to say, like, you don't have to be in teacher training to get a spiritual name. If you feel called to get one, not being in teacher training, then by all means you can request one. But most people get it during the teacher training process because, one, they're not really aware of it or how to get one before that. And also because it's kind of like, your spiritual name is kind of like taking on a new identity, and going through teacher training is all about taking on a new identity. Like, you shed so much junk and so many stories and parts of your identity that were kind of programmed in there through karma or through ancestral lineage or just experiences that you've had in this lifetime, that you kind of come out feeling like a new person, but really you're just more you than you've ever been in your whole life. So you can see the world more clearly. But it's a new, fresh experience. It's a new way of being. And so it makes sense that that's a great time to get your spiritual name, because you're kind of taking on this new identity, and it's really nice to have a name for it. Okay, so circling back around. So teacher training at our local studio in Huntington Beach, spiritual names are explained and kind of how to get one, but there's no pressure for people to get one or to use it publicly. And so my observation has been that most people get a spiritual name and choose not to use it publicly. And oftentimes for the people who do choose to use it publicly, it's because they are actively wanting to let go of prior experiences or prior identities. And so some people have experienced trauma or have experienced life as a victim, feeling like a victim, or they've been victimized frequently. And so the spiritual name is an opportunity to kind of try on a new identity. And so that's kind of been my observation. And it's not to say that everyone who uses a spiritual name has that experience. I'm more sharing it because if that is something you've been through, if you've struggled with a history of trauma and you feel like you're in a process of shifting your identity around that trauma, a spiritual name might be a really nice way to kind of delineate, that you kind of had one way of being prior to this moment, and now you have a new way of being going forward. So again, because this is the culture at our studio, most people get a spiritual name, but not everybody. And most people do not use their spiritual name publicly, but some do. It's kind of all about personal preference and what you feel called to. And then here in Los Angeles, at Yoga West, the studio where Yogi Bhajan actually taught, many of the teachers use spiritual names. And so if you look at their schedule, there's a lot of spiritual names. And so I don't know if that's because there are more teachers teaching there that were direct students of Yogi Bhajan, or if that's just the culture of their studio that people use their spiritual names within that context. And then another way you can go about it is some people use their spiritual names like within the Kundalini yoga world, and then in the rest of the world, like at work or with their family, they use their given name. And then some people just go 100%, everybody's calling them their spiritual name. So again, there's no rules here. You get to self-initiate to the extent to which you want to self-initiate a spiritual name. I found it interesting though, as I was looking through the information on 3HO about spiritual names for this episode, that they highlight, like in all caps, that a spiritual name is not required to teach Kundalini yoga. So you should never feel pressured or coerced into getting a spiritual name. Coerce is probably too strong of a word, but the way they capitalize it is not like capital N-O-T, makes me suspect that there are some teacher training programs that really emphasize the spiritual name when its original intention, as I've been sharing, is self-initiation. Like you decide when you're ready for it. So Ramtin and I both got our spiritual names during our teacher training year. We both felt called to get them. And I can share with you, like I was skeptical, as I've shared on this podcast, like I'm a total skeptic. I was skeptical about the meaning of it or the purpose of it. Like the sounds always seem so foreign, and it just like seemed like a weird thing to do. But I got one because I eventually, like a few months in, just kind of felt called to request it. And then when I received the email with the name and the translation, I should say it was really more the meaning, not the direct translation of the words, but the meaning of the words of the name. I can't even put into words how it felt, to be honest. It was like there was this deepest knowing in myself that I was infinite and perfect. And now I can say those words without as much resistance. But then I was, 3 months into my teacher training, I was still carrying a lot of the insecurities that I had built up over my life and a lot of the karma that I came into this life with. And so this idea that I was, perfect and divine and infinite was a new, like, fledgling, like the seed had been planted, but not really nurtured yet. And so to read my spiritual name, it really validated what I both suspected and feared about myself and who I was and how powerful and big I was. That experience really reminds me of the Marianne Williamson quote that our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. So up until receiving my spiritual name, I had kind of been living this fear that Marianne Williamson talks about of being afraid of my light, being afraid of my power, playing small so as not to stick out or be rejected or make other people feel lesser than or uncomfortable. And I had started to shed some of that or become aware of that. But then when I received my spiritual name, for me, it was kind of like a serious calling out of that old way of being and a calling up and towards a bigger, broader, more infinite way of being, and just kind of owning my power as a spiritual being, having a human experience. So given my skeptical state, particularly at that point in my journey, I was really surprised by how profoundly impacted I was by the spiritual name. And I was in awe and kind of felt validated that somehow someone could see in me what I felt was there, but was afraid to acknowledge. And so the spiritual name was one of many pieces that helped me acknowledge that part of myself. So Ramtin and I talked a little bit about whether or not we wanted to share our spiritual names with you guys on this episode. And because we don't use them publicly, so I guess I'll cover that first. Ramtin and I both feel the same ways about our spiritual names, that it's kind of like a personal calling. It's my personal spiritual identity for sure. And it's my spiritual prayer. And I, aim to live up to the meaning of my spiritual name and to embody it. But as we talked about it, because we don't use it publicly, we both decided not to share the exact names and translations in this podcast. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought how for you to know our name and the meaning doesn't really serve or develop your own consciousness or spiritual growth anyway. It would just be an opportunity to invite your mind to compare like what your name might be against ours, or to bring on judgment or whatever. And so since it wouldn't serve you, and we both feel pretty privately about our spiritual names. Like it's a very personal thing to us. That's how we choose to use our spiritual names. We're not going to share them here on the podcast episode. But like I said, if you want to get your spiritual name, if you feel called to, you would just go to 3ho.org and you can request it there. All right, so let's transition into our pranayama for today. And today we're going to do breath of fire. So this breathing practice is used in just about all Kundalini yoga kriyas. It's a powerful breathing practice on its own, but it's often done with ego eradicator and stretch bows and all those wonderful things. This practice should not be done if you are pregnant or if you're on your menstrual cycle. And so if you're in either of those states of being, then you can continue with long deep breathing, because we're going to start with long deep breathing and then graduate to breath of fire. But before we jump into it, some of the benefits of breath of fire, in case you haven't heard them, is this breathing practice releases toxins and deposits from the lungs, blood vessels, and other cells. It expands the lung capacity. It helps to strengthen the nervous system so that you can resist stress. It repairs the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. It strengthens your navel chakra. It increases your physical endurance and prepares you to act effectively. It adjusts the subtle psychoelectromagnetic field of the aura so that your blood becomes energized. It reduces addictive impulses for drugs, smoking, or bad foods, increases oxygen delivery to the brain, helping you be more focused, intelligent, and neutral. It boosts the immune system, and it promotes synchronization of the biorhythms of the body systems. So there's a lot going on with breath of fire. You can hear now why it's included in so many practices. It just really is so powerful. But let's get started. Like I said, we'll get started with long, deep breathing. So come sitting up nice and tall, chin tucked down and back ever so gently. You can go ahead and close your eyes. And then as you inhale, fill up your belly. Expand your chest once the belly is full. And then up into the upper clavicle and shoulders. And then exhale, shoulders come down, ribs knit together, belly button back to the spine. So we'll do 2 more like this. Really focus on how as you inhale, your belly expands. Then it comes up to the chest, then the clavicle or shoulders. Exhaling, clavicle or shoulders, ribs, and belly. So again, if you're pregnant or on your cycle, you'll continue with long, deep breathing. It is also a powerful practice, so don't worry, you are not missing out. But if you're able to do breath of fire today, we will practice slowly and then we'll get up to speed. But please keep in mind, you can always stay at whatever speed works for you. So for breath of fire, it's a quick breath powered by the navel. And so it's a quick inhale with the navel coming out, and then an exhale with the navel going in. So inhale powerfully, pushing the navel out. Exhale powerfully through the nose, pushing the navel back. So that is the pattern. And so we'll practice first using the puppy dog breath. And so if you open your mouth, stick your tongue out, and just pant like a dog. Kind of like you're a kid mimicking a dog. Can you feel how your navel is pumping to get you to do that? That's exactly what breath of fire is, except through the nose. So you can close your mouth and then continue with that breath of fire, with that pumping of your navel through the nose. And so we'll go ahead and begin now. Keeping up that pattern. I'm probably going a little bit fast for you if you're new, so you can go slower. It can be helpful to focus mostly on the exhale. So get that powerful exhale and then the inhale can happen naturally. Make sure your shoulders are relaxed, your face is relaxed, your eyes are closed, keeping up that breath of fire. Pumping that navel, eyes are focused at the third eye. If you start to get dizzy or like you're not getting enough breath, you can slow it down. Or you can take a few long, deep breaths, inhaling belly, ribs, and chest, exhaling chest, ribs, and belly, and then resuming breath of fire. If you haven't practiced breath of fire much, or recently you might start to feel sensations in your energetic body, you might feel tingling or opening. You can always envision the auric field around you getting whiter and brighter. I like to imagine like around my navel center, there's like a bike pump, like one of those old school bike pumps. And with every breath, I'm like pumping up. I'm using a bike pump to pump up my auric field. You have less than a minute left. Keep up that powerful breath. Opening up energy pathways, strengthening your nervous system. Beautiful. Go ahead and inhale deeply. Suspend the breath briefly, pulling yourself up nice and tall, squeezing your body like a tube of toothpaste, directing the energy up the central channel of the body, out the crown of the head, eyes focused at the third eye. Exhale, relax your body, relax your breath. Allow the energy to continue to circulate. Allow your breath to return to a natural state. And then blink your eyes open. Wonderful. Beautiful practice. And thank you so much for listening and being here today. I wanted to share with you that this is your last chance to sign up for our Renew Year retreat that we're doing over the New Year holiday. So we're going from December 28th to January 1st here in Southern California. So the idea behind this retreat is to just take a few days as we transition into 2020, which I can't even believe. We're going to take a few days to connect with ourselves, kind of to shed the past, to connect with our inner truth or our Sat Nam, and then to really identify our soul intentions for 2020. So some deep, inspiring callings for the next year. And you can really only do that if you spent some time shedding and connecting. And so that's the goal of the retreat, or the intention behind the retreat. And so we've designed practices and collaborated with our nutritionist friend, Heather Fleming, to create an experience that will help you release emotions that are stored in your body and mind that you no longer need. It's going to help you release thoughts and beliefs that are holding you back. We're going to do practices to connect with your true self or your Sat Nam, and we'll have an opportunity to relax and rejuvenate your nervous system so you can be more present in your life. We're going to do practices to quiet your mind so you can listen to your heart. And we're going to chant and eat food that will help you raise your vibration so you feel light, free, and connected. We're going to tune into your body and your intuition. And then like I said, we're going to set inspired, soulful intentions for 2020. And we are going to celebrate New Year's Eve. And so to accomplish these goals, we're going to do, like Ramtin and I will teach Kundalini yoga and meditation. Ramtin will lead some gong baths. We have some beautiful guided visualizations and like deeper meditations to do. We're going to include a rebirthing Kriya from the Kundalini yoga traditions, which is just a really deep Kriya made to release stories in the subconscious mind. And then our friend Heather Fleming is going to intuitively create really high vibe vegetarian meals. We'll have vegan options available if you choose not to eat animal products. So just think about like how good one Kundalini yoga class feels. Imagine doing like one full class every morning, and then in the evenings we're going to do a deeper meditation and contemplative practice. And then during the day we're going to eat good food and go for hikes. We'll have downtime for journaling and just connecting and conversing. That's kind of my favorite part about retreats. Like I always sign up for a retreat for the activities, but the real amazing parts come from those conversations, you know, like during lunch or during downtime where you get to just connect with like-minded people. So we would love to have you there. I think we have like 1 or 2 spots available right now, and there's a few people who are interested. So if you're interested, I would sign up now. The website to sign up is heartcenteredrevolution.com/retreat. Again, it's heartcenteredrevolution.com/retreat. And then the page is actually on Heather Fleming's website. So when you go to that link, it'll kind of forward you to the page on her site, in case that is confusing. And then you also, if you have questions or you just want to kind of connect about travel issues or scheduling stuff or anything like that, you can always email me at jen@heartcenteredrevolution.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions, or we can schedule like a 15-minute phone call if you just want to connect before committing to the retreat, or if you have any questions about the retreat. So we hope to see you there. I just can't think of a better way to spend New Year's Eve, or spend that time of year. Okay, well, we love you, and whether we see you or not, we hope you have a wonderful holiday season. We probably won't have another episode up until January, so this will be the last time you hear about the retreat too. So if you know it's not for you, then have no fear. This will be the last podcast episode that promotes our retreat. So we will talk to you in January. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we love you. So now.